time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the Heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello. Hi. How are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. Well, it's Sunday morning with Laura. Man, I enjoyed this. I've been missing it a little bit. We haven't had her on as much as I would like. Laura had a little bit of a setback. People may be aware of that, but she's on the recovery. She's on the road. She's on the rebound. She's out chasing them around, maybe not literally, but figuratively at Bleeding Heartland. Laura Belin joining us on the podcast by George live line again this morning. And for folks that may or may not know, Bleeding Heartland is a community blog providing original reporting and commentary about Iowa politics, especially campaigns and elections, state government, social, and environmental issues. Bleeding Heartland also covers what the Iowans in Congress are up to and any federal, state, or local policies of interest to Iowa readers. We're going to be talking about all of that, folks. Laura Belin has been the state's the site's primary author and sole editor since early 2008. How time flies when you're not having fun. So there's her graphic that I like to show people. That's the podcast by George live line graphic. Let's bring her on in and say happy Sunday, good Sunday morning to you, Laura.
Good to see you, George.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you on here. There's been a number of things that every now and then it comes up in the news. I look at this and I got to talk to Laura about this. I want to see this. And of course, I'm a subscriber to Bleeding Heartland, and I see all these articles come cascading down. And some of them really deserve more attention and exposure than they get sometimes. And I'm happy to do that with my podcast. We got at least one of those today, but a couple of other stories that have gotten pretty wide attention. And we're going to talk about those. So this first one that I wanted to bring up is something that you and I have talked about a lot almost ever since the CARES Act money came down. You know, I was opposed that the way that was handled, that money was put in the hands of the wrong people, I think, not in the hands of the working class, but in the hands of people like Kim Reynolds. And this is part of the reason, and this is what's coming to light. And you warned about this long ago. And there's a federal audit that's underway reviewing the CARES Act funds for the governor's staff salaries. And you've covered this extensively before. I got to say this right off the top. Let me see if I can bring this up. How do I bring this up full screen? Let me see if I can do that. I want to show this as large as possible. Okay, so now that didn't make it large. It just took us away, but that's okay. So here's this photo of Kim Reynolds. And Laura's a working journalist. I mean, she knows more about journalism than I do, that's for sure. But you're using this photo, and I got to commend you for this, because I look at this. Sometimes I see these photos by people that are in the, kind of on the other side of Kim Reynolds, and they're showing photos of her that make her look like, what's the Emperor in Star Wars or something. I mean, they're just hideous photos. You don't have to use glamour shots, but you ought to try to use something that maybe fairly represents what the woman looks like. And I would say this particular photo, at the very least, Laura, is complimentary. I mean, this is a really nice photo of Kim Reynolds. It's not a hit job photo anyway.
No, I mean, I don't run hit job photos. This is her most recent official photo that her office released to reporters maybe 2 or 3 months ago. I try to use pictures. Sometimes I can find pictures from the governor's Facebook or Twitter feeds. I have a post going up later today that'll show a picture of her at a bill signing that comes from her Facebook page. I try not to deliberately post unflattering photos of anyone, frankly. I mean, I just don't think that's necessary. It doesn't add anything to the reporting.
I mean, that's a great point. And I talk about the First Amendment and journalism a lot on my show. And I tell people that I really think the last bastion of really significant yellow journalism in print particularly, but also you'll see it on the cable news channels, are these photos. I mean, a photo, is worth 1,000 words, whatever they say. Well, these photos make a difference. So I'm really glad to see that. I got to commend you on that. Well, let's get into this article. So this is really big stuff, folks. The U.S. Treasury Department's Office of Inspector General is reviewing documentation provided to justify Governor Kim Reynolds' use of federal COVID-19 relief funds to compensate staff in her office. Deputy Inspector General Richard Delmar told Bleeding Heartland on March 14. State auditors' new report reported conclusions reached last year. The governor maintained more staff than her budget could afford, and her office was on track to overspend its budget prior to the pandemic. Okay, so prior to this money being available, basically. In addition, the governor's office had no policies and procedures to document the employees' work during the period or how they arrived at the 62.59% calculation. I'm jumping around a little bit in the article, I think. So, what's that calculation about, Laura? What is that?
So what happened was that the governor took for 21 of her permanent staffers, they used CARES Act funds to cover about 62.59% of their salaries and benefits from about the middle of March through the end of June 2020. That was the last 3.5 months of the 2020 fiscal year. And what I learned through a series of records requests to various agencies was that this was the governor's office was on track to overspend its budget. I mean, typically the governor's office does overspend its budget and other agencies cover some of the spending. And that's in fact what happened in the last fiscal year. But in the 2020 fiscal year, they decided to use COVID relief funds, CARES Act funds, to make up the difference. And what I learned, and state auditors mentioned in their report on this, is that the staff at the Department of Management, which is the budget agency, they looked in the finance software and they determined that the shortfall in the governor's office budget was $448,449. And the governor's office had sent a list and said, these 21 people were doing a lot of work on the pandemic. And so what they did was they looked at the salaries and benefits owed to those 21 people and then figured out how much they could cover with what the governor's office appropriation already had. And they figured out that to make up this shortfall of $448,449, they just needed to use CARES Act funds for 62.59%. So in other words, they didn't come up with a figure based on keeping track of timesheets and saying these people spent 62% of their time working on it. And the CARES Act guidance was really strict. The American Rescue Plan, by the way, is a lot less strict in how the money can be spent. But the CARES Act guidance from the U.S. Treasury Department was really strict. And this was the Trump administration's Treasury Department. Remember, they said it has to be used for necessary costs incurred due to the pandemic that were not budgeted for in the most recent budget. And these were staff who had all been hired prior to the pandemic, and their salaries were not necessary costs incurred due to the pandemic. They were already on the payroll before the pandemic. So that is kind of the crux of it. It's a little bit, but I reported on this in September of 2020. State Auditor Rob Sand warned the governor's office about this in October of 2020. He issued a finding that the governor's office should not use $21 million in CARES Act funds for this Workday computer system. I think you may remember we talked about that. And this federal auditors agreed with that finding. And the governor's office eventually in December of 2020 repaid $1 million that they had allocated to Workday, but they didn't repay this money that was used for the governor's staff salaries. And Rob, this may end up being unsupported, and it would be better for you to return this money and spend it on things that are definitely allowed.
I'm getting some internet freeze here. Let me see if I can bring. I don't know what the heck the video is freezing for. So we'll try to get back with Laura here and see if that unfreezes shortly. But here's what I would say about it. And the subtitle for my show really is "Insult to Injury." And the insult, this part of it is there were a lot of things this money could have been used for. I mean, things in a pandemic, things that could have kept people alive, folks that are no longer with us. That's what I think. And so that wasn't done. And this money was spent in other ways. And then, that's the insult to the injury. But the house of mirrors here that we live in, that's the other subtitle for my podcast, is that we have these fiscally conservative Republicans, they want everybody to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And here's the governor of the great state of Iowa, and she's taking this federal money and just throwing it around, rewarding it to people in her office. And of course, they're supposedly against big government. These Republicans are. Well, what creates big government? Big money. And that's what was taking place here. So it's shocking, and it's a big deal, because not only is it a lot of money, we're talking $500,000 here in a state budget. That's a big issue. But the governor, of course, is up for reelection. I mean, and she's going to run on to a great extent, championing the cause of her having this budget surplus, that she's managing the state's finances so well that she's got money to spare. Well, where did some of that money to spare come from? It came from that, folks. And that's why that's such a big story. And again, Laura Belin in Bleeding Heartland was all over this from the beginning. So let's see if we can bring Laura back in here very shortly. We'll get her back, her video feed here, back in as soon as we can. I don't know why that froze the way that it did, but Laura was on the cutting edge of this story, and we were on the show here talking about why this is significant. And now federal auditors are taking a look at it, and they're agreeing. This is a big issue, folks. I don't know how much trouble our governor's in. And maybe I would say, again, this brings out the lefty in me. I don't know what will become of this. I don't know if there will be anything other than some slight political damage because of this to Kim Reynolds. And again, that's why I never wanted to see this kind of money sent down, even with the stipulations and restrictions that Laura was talking about, and put into the hands of somebody like Kim Reynolds, because that's what happens. Okay, there's Laura. She's come back in. So hopefully this
we're gonna blame CenturyLink for that, my internet network. But I heard the last part of what you said.
Good.
I mean, one of the issues, though, is not just Kim Reynolds, but this Republican legislature really chose to have no oversight. I mean,
Yes.
they gave the governor complete control over how this CARES Act money would be spent, and later how the American Rescue Plan money would be spent. And Democrats tried to offer amendments to certain bills that would require more reporting and more approval by the Legislative Council. In other states, the governor's office, there was a lot more legislative oversight. And I had to laugh when I asked the governor's office a lot of questions about this recent state audit report that repeated last year's findings that they need to pay this money back. The governor, they didn't answer a lot of my questions, but one thing they did was sent me a link to some report where the Minnesota governor's office had like close to $300,000. But it was the report was it was something that the governor's office in Minnesota had submitted to the state legislature in the summer of 2020. So they were
Well, son of a gun, I'm going to have to jump back in here again. It just froze once again. Why would it do that? Son of a gun. Maybe we do blame CenturyLink for that, folks. I apologize, and I hope that we can get this going. Let's see if I can kind of monitor here and look down here and see if she unfreezes shortly. So, Laura, if you stay on that stream and it unfreezes, just give me a wave. I'll be able to see that anyway, and I'll be able to add you back in here, I hope. Yeah, but she's making an excellent point there. And I guess my question would be whether or not there's any precedent for this. She mentioned the state of Minnesota. I mean, this looks to me, like big trouble in little China, whatever that expression is. But this doesn't look good for our governor, because this is a federal audit. And it's revealing this shortfall in her budget and her accounting, which has been hotly contested by Laura Belin and others. And it doesn't look too good for her. And again, whether or not anything will become of it, I don't know. But we have several issues that we want to talk to with Laura about today. And one of them is this budget situation with the governor. And then, of course, kind of a follow-up to her State of the Union response. There's been, again, some misallocation. That would be the good news. The bad news would be misappropriation of funds associated with that. So let's, here she comes back in. Let's see if we can get this thing to work. Maybe third time's the charm here for sure. There you are, Laura. You come back on. It works.
I apologize for my internet. We are trying to get better internet here in my Windsor Heights neighborhood. It's not yet different. It's not yet serving my neighborhood, but that's on our agenda for 2022.
It looks good right now, and to move from the CARES Act situation. Now, this is very significant because, as I mentioned, while you were kind of coming in and out, the governor is championing her, excellent budgetary ability. The fact that she's sitting on this budget surplus with the state of Iowa, and of course, a lot of it's just moving money around. It's kind of a shell game, and this federal money, $500,000 of it, is a big shell, folks. Let me tell you about that. But it's
Oh, well,
also, yeah.
the surplus, the $1.25 billion surplus, is almost completely due to the federal money that poured in during the pandemic.
Yes.
And it's not even just, I mean, there's a lot of federal support that people don't even know about. Iowa got something like $690 million just to help with Medicaid. So that was money the state didn't have to spend on what would normally be the state's share of Medicaid. There were all kinds of things like that that happened during the pandemic to support state budgets. And most states around the country are enjoying a large budget surplus right now. So it really has nothing to do with Kim Reynolds or the Republican legislature. It's just all about this federal money, which will not last forever. In a few years, it's going to be going away.
Well, it's also responsible, the surplus, for her kind of being a rising star in the Republican Party. They like Kim Reynolds, folks, and one of the biggest examples of that is this. And this is something else that's kind of a scoop in Bleeding Heartland that Laura has brought to the attention of those that are paying attention. And it's an exclusive. The governor was comped a state building for the State of the Union response. Now, a lot of folks watch this. I know a lot of Republican loyalists watch it. I don't know. Again, these deficit hawks, these people that are so fiscally responsible. I don't know if they were aware of this or not. But let me, this is, okay, so let me bring this up. I can hear the dogs in the background. Governor Kim Reynolds delivered the Republican response to the State of the Union from a government building terrace that is currently closed for Reynolds, and her office paid nothing to use the space. The governor's spokesperson, Alex Murphy, confirmed on March 2nd that Reynolds gave the speech from the state historical building terrace. 5 days and several emails later, Murphy confirmed the building did not charge a fee for the governor's use of that space. Now, Laura writes that the state historical building's terrace was an ideal location for Reynolds to deliver the most high-profile remarks of her career on March 1st. The opposition party rarely can provide visuals, and you've seen these things before. They're just kind of sitting in front of a drape or a curtain or something like that normally, but they don't normally get to do that. As striking as the president's annual address to a joint session of Congress, Reynolds had the illuminated gold dome of Iowa State Capitol behind her as she made her case against the Biden administration and for the Republican governance. And that's very important. So let me go up here. I'm going to show this. This will be very brief, just a minute or two, just the open actually. But before I show this video, I'm going to get Laura's reaction to it. I'm going to give mine going into it. If you listen here to what Reynolds says, the thing that jumped out at me first was she talks about it feels like. And this is something, and Laura's not as old as I am, but it's kind of come to be, I got it all started with Reaganism. And that's what I think of when I see Reynolds. People talk about what they feel as if that is like that's fact, like that's not fiction. But she talks about feelings here at the beginning. And she kind of ends up talking about Ukraine and, beating that war drum a little bit. But let's bring this up on screen.
Good evening. I'm Kim Reynolds, Governor of the great state of Iowa. Like you, I just watched the President's address. I listened as the governor of our state, as a mom and a grandmother of 11 who's worried our country is on the wrong track. We're now 1 year into his presidency, and instead of moving America forward, it feels like President Biden and his party have sent us back in time to the late 70s and early 80s. When runaway inflation was hammering families, a violent crime wave was crashing our cities, and the Soviet Army was trying to redraw the world map. Even before taking the oath of office, the President told us that he wanted to, quote, make America respected around the world again, and to unite us here at home. He's failed on both fronts. The disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal did more than cost American lives. It betrayed our allies and emboldened our enemies. North Korea is testing missiles again at an alarming rate. The Speaker of the House recently warned our Olympic athletes not to speak out against China. And now Russia has launched an unprovoked, full-scale military invasion of Ukraine, an attack on democracy, freedom, and the rule of law. Now all Americans must stand united in solidarity with the brave people of Ukraine as they courageously defend their country against Putin's tyranny as they fight for their freedom.
Okay, so I mean, Laura will be able to pick this apart every which way but loose. And that war drum beating that I was talking about at the end, now, I'm a real lefty, folks. I'm a real pacifist. I'm a real anti-war person. I'm wanting people to come to the negotiating table to press for a ceasefire. And Reynolds' party is, yeah, I don't even know if they even talk about that. But to me, the push should be, the emphasis should be on getting these parties together under a ceasefire to try to talk a way out of this, to keep from blowing people up. But anyway, I digress. That was longer than I thought it would be, Laura, but what's your overall take or response?
Well, I mean, the post that I wrote the evening of this response, and also Senator Joni Ernst also released her own video. It wasn't broadcast on national television like the governor's, but she released her own video, and she had similar remarks blaming President Biden and making it sound like Biden was somehow to blame for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And I just thought it was astounding, given that, I mean, Donald Trump was so enthralled with Vladimir Putin, the Russian president. He really did a lot of things that advanced Russia's interests. He wanted to pull us out of the NATO alliance. That would have been a huge victory for Russia. And he tried to blackmail the president of Ukraine when in the summer of 2019, this was the whole point of the first impeachment of Donald Trump, was that Ukraine was trying to get military aid that Congress had already approved and Donald Trump had already signed. And he said, we need you to do us a favor, though. He wanted Ukraine to announce publicly that it was launching a corruption investigation related to Joe Biden's family. So, I mean, to say that Biden was weak and somehow implying that Republicans were strong against Russia is just such revisionist history. So that was really my main point. And the scoop that you mentioned about the governor being comp to state building, I would call that an accidental scoop, because someone messaged me that during the governor's speech, is she at the state historical building? We were trying to figure out where she was. And I said, I think so. It seemed like that might be a location she would use. So I emailed the governor's office the next day and I heard back, yes, she was on the state historical building. And then my next question was, well, who paid for it? Because some people might think that this was an official event. This is not an official event. Giving the State of the Union response, this is a Republican Party event.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I'm wondering, was it the Reynolds campaign? Was it the Republican National Committee? Or was it perhaps the Republican Governors Association? And I wasn't even thinking that I would write a story about this. I just thought I would hear back. And then I would maybe post on my Twitter feed or Facebook that, by the way, for anyone who was wondering, the governor was using the State Historical Building and the such and such, Republican National Committee paid for the cost or something. I didn't even think it was going to be a story. And then the governor's office didn't respond. I then emailed the communications people at the Department of Cultural Affairs. That's the state agency that manages the historical building. And I haven't dealt with them very often, but they've been responsive when I've dealt with them in the past. And they acknowledged receipt of my email, but they never got back to me about who paid for the space and who approved the space. And so finally, like I said, 5 days later, the governor's spokesperson said they didn't charge a fee. And I thought, well, that's not right. I mean, this is a political event. And how did the State Historical Building not charge a fee? So that's when I started looking into what would be the normal fee for renting the terrace. And that's when I found out that this terrace is not even available for rental right now. It's closed. It's been closed for more than a year and it's still closed. You cannot, for any price, you cannot rent that terrace right now for an event. So I thought, why was the governor given favorable treatment? Why was nobody charged for using a government building? I mean, it really shouldn't be provided at no charge for a political event like that.
And there is a fee structure. If it were open, it's published. You're supposed to pay for that thing. You just don't walk up and use it for nothing. I think, didn't you say there was a little discount maybe associated with it, a 20%? Yeah.
They've had a policy that for a state government agency, they get a 20% discount. Actually, the current fee structure is not published. When I called when I couldn't get any answers from the communication staff, I just called the person who's listed on the website. as the facilities manager and asked about rentals. And she confirmed that the only space in the State Historical Building that you can rent right now is the auditorium. The rest of it is they're doing a lot of renovations to the building. So they're just not, you can't rent the atrium. And there are other spaces that you can't rent. But I said, well, how much would it cost to rent the terrace? And she said they're restructuring, they're reevaluating their fees. So when this renovation is done, so they actually don't have a current fee structure that you can even look at because, like I said, the terrace is not even supposed to be available to anyone right now. So, but it was important for the governor, and it was woven into her speech about, I don't remember, somewhere in her speech, 10 or 12 minutes in, I think she had a line about behind me, you can see our state capitol. So it was very important to her. I mean, that speech was written in advance, of course. So it was important for her to have that backdrop, but it's not an official event. And even for official events, really the governor's office should not be using a space like that free of charge. They should get a discount if it were an official event, but it was a political event. And whoever it was who was paying for the vendors, I'm still trying to find out who was paying for the audiovisual people. She had a wind tent around her that had to be set up. You know, there's a lot that goes into these. This was
I know.
Several hours of work. You would know better than I would about all the camera work, and they have to do the sound checks and everything. So they were clearly using that space for several hours.
It's labor intensive. It's very powerful. And people that don't think so, I have a family member that I think in college had a pen pal in Iran, I think, and their textbook in Iran on the United States had the Iowa State Capitol depicted on the front cover.
Wow.
And that was the photo that they chose to here. Let me show this again now, just a few seconds here.
Good evening. I'm Kim Reynolds, Governor of the great state of Iowa.
So, I mean, look at that and compare that to a curtain.
Sure.
And speaking of curtain, I always like to show this. So here's this is my favorite curtain. This is Oz behind the curtain.
You know, we do have one of the most beautiful state capitals. I haven't seen, but I know people who have traveled and seen most of the state capitals, and the Iowa Capitol Dome really is quite impressive.
It sure is, and it's being used politically, and the insult to the injury. If folks are watching this and you're not in the Kim Reynolds camp, you're paying for that. That's your tax dollars at work. If you're fiscally conservative and you're a Republican and you're within the sound of my voice, that's your fiscally conservative tax dollars being used for purely political reasons. And if you hate politics, which a lot of people do, this is one person pointing at politics and another person pointing at politics. And my God, it's unbelievable to me that type of thing happens. And again, that if you don't follow Bleeding Heartland, you may not even become aware of it. So I'm just glad to bring a little more light to that story. That was a great story, Laura.
Well, I hope to have a follow-up at some point. Like I said, I'm still finding information. I don't know why they didn't just have the campaign pay for it. I mean, like I said, I didn't even think it was going to be a story because I just assumed some Republican committee paid for it.
Well, let me bring this next story up because, again, this is something that if you're in Bleeding Heartland, you're going to have a good look at that you won't get elsewhere. And this is, again, pulling the curtain back, kind of the title for this particular podcast. But it says, one Iowa lobbyist startling but informative admission. March 18 was the Iowa legislature's second funnel deadline. Other than tax or appropriation bills, most legislation must have been approved by one chamber, at least one committee in the other chamber, in order to stay alive for the rest of the year. We're seeing some coverage on that now, what's dead, what's alive. Every year, some bills that clear the Iowa House or Senate nearly unanimously die without action in the other chamber or remain alive in name only, having been gutted while moving through committee. Well, Laura writes, why would a proposal with support across the spectrum run into trouble? Sometimes a committee chair or member of leadership has a specific reason for wanting to kill a bill. Other times, powerful interest groups put on a full court press to slow the momentum of a popular idea. It's often hard for lawmakers or lobbyists on the record why a bill died in such circumstances. But a few days ago, one experienced lobbyist laid it on the table during a Senate subcommittee hearing. So I'm going to show this video, just a minute or so of it. Laura, set the scene here a little bit.
So there's a bill on licensing midwives. They're certified professional midwives. These are midwives who attend births out of hospitals. And Iowa does not have any legal structure for facilitating that profession, and creates a lot of problems. So midwives have literally been working for 20 years to try to get a bill through that would license their practice. And finally, it got to the floor of the Iowa House. It passed 93 votes to 2. And this was last Tuesday. A Senate subcommittee and state government committee was looking at this bill. So this is what was happening during the subcommittee. Many medical industry lobbyists, people representing hospital groups, doctors groups, insurance, a couple of insurance companies spoke against the bill. And the Democratic State Senator Pam Yoakum, who's been a longtime supporter of midwives, asked at the beginning of the clip, why are you coming out now? Where were you when the bill was in the House?
Okay, so that's where it was. Now, I looked at this and I thought this is a very good example of saying the quiet part out loud. Is that the way that it struck you?
It really did. And I have to thank Rachel Bruns. This is a meeting. I had an appointment last Tuesday, and so I wasn't able to watch the subcommittee live. But Rachel Bruns, who is an advocate for midwives, filmed the whole subcommittee, and she was posting these video clips, and that's where I saw it on her Twitter feed. I think she also posted it on Facebook. And I was just stunned because I've heard people talk about this, but I've never heard anybody say it in a public forum like this lobbyist did.
All right, so let's I think I may have started this too late to catch the actual lobbyist part of it, but let's see where this starts.
So I just asked, where the heck were all of you when this bill went to the House? I mean, it sailed through 93 to 2. Okay.
There's
Okay, so
I'll talk about it. There are a number of issues that are in the interest of people in this room, different competing interests. I'm Carla Fultz-McHenry, Iowa Independent Physicians Group. I've been fighting this bill since I first started with the Medical Society in 2001. So I am opposed to the bill. There's no question about anybody in the room that knows me that knows I am. This has been around for a long time. There are competing interests this year, and I think that people did not want to anger the chair of the state government committee or anger the leadership in the House. That's the situation.
one other question, and that is this bill modeled after another state?
Yes.
Which state?
The last 8 to 10 that license. This is the language that was agreed upon. This is what ACOG supports, ACNM, the Nurse Midwives support, the International Confederation of Midwives. This is not new language. This is what ACOG is supporting nationally for CPM licensure. So this is where this came from.
I'm sorry to jump in here, Senator, but I do want to clarify because ACOG Iowa does not have a representative that works with the Iowa Medical Society. That's not an accurate statement. ACOG Iowa does not support this. ACOG National does not support this. There are elements within the bill that they have a level of comfort with, but they are not supportive of the overall concept or the local business.
I'm happy to send the ACOG policy statements that shows that they do support this on a national level. And also there was recently a committee meeting at the American Medical Association where ACOG reaffirmed their support for licensing certified professional midwives and this bill. Everything that has just been said is untrue based on the national endorsement.
What's the acronym? So I can research
The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology.
COG. Just like the
All right.
Any more questions, Senator?
I have a lot of them.
Okay, so maybe I started that a little late, but I think Laura gave the.
No, you got the important part where this is what this lobbyist, Carla McFult-Henry, is very experienced, and she works with a group. There are several lobbyist companies, lobbyist firms, and they represent a lot of clients, some of them. And so they have a lot of bills in play when you get close to a funnel deadline, like last week. They have a lot of things that they need to get through. The state government committee, which is Bobby Kaufman's committee, and they may have other things that are already eligible for debate on the House floor, and they want to make sure that House leaders bring those bills to the floor. So obviously there was a decision to lay back and not say anything against this bill when it was going through the House, because they knew that important people. Bobby Kaufman, by the way, the chair of the state government committee in the Iowa House, is the son of Jeff Kaufman, who is the Republican Party of Iowa state chair. So he's an important person from a big family. And so obviously there was a decision made by these lobbyists to let him have his day and get this bill through the House. and then work to kill it in the Senate, which they basically did because the Senate subcommittee and later the full Senate committee advanced the bill, but the amendment they did just basically took out everything of substance in the bill that would create a licensing structure that would be useful for midwives. So they just kind of destroyed the bill. They advanced it and kept it alive. So it could possibly be part of horse trading later on this year, but I wouldn't put any money on this kind of bill to the governor's desk.
Talk about bills, you talk about funnels. The bill that I would like to see, I know it's been talked about. It's probably not up for decision making this time around, but it would be to restrict or limit the role of these lobbyists in the legislature. And of course, it goes all the way up to the U.S. The federal government and Congress and everything else trying to get the money out of politics. I mean, again, with the Republican controlled legislature, that's probably not something that's going to happen anytime soon, in your opinion.
I really haven't heard of any restrictions being proposed on Iowa lobbyists, but one of my readers did comment last night that this is why he doesn't like to work with contract lobbyists. There are some lobbyists who work with only one or two organizations and represent their interests, but then, this is a problem when you're working with someone who's part of a firm. And I'm not saying that they're not very skilled at their jobs, but your bill may end up getting sacrificed because they have some other client who's paying them more, who has a more important bill that they want to get through. And sometimes the leadership of the Iowa House or Senate won't give the lobbyists everything they want. And so choices have to be made. And so I think it's an issue. I thought it was very interesting because, like I said in the post, this is a dynamic I've heard people talk about before, but I've never heard anyone say it out loud in a public forum. And that's why I thought it was worth reporting on. I said that Bethany Gates wrote a very informative piece for my blog a couple of days ago explaining this midwives bill and why it's important for maternal health and why this bill should have been passed, the version that passed the House, why it Senate and exactly what happened. She's a midwife herself and she's been this issue. So if anyone wants to learn more about the actual bill, there is a post on the front page of my website right now where they can learn more about the bill. But this piece that you're highlighting, I really just wanted to talk about the lobbying dynamic and what happens, especially as we get close to these funnel deadlines.
You want to see some sausage being made. I guess that is it for sure. Well, the internet is not playing ball real well. Most of the audio has streamed okay. So we've got Laura's comments to come across, and people that are listening to it in audio, I think, are going to have a good show. The video has been worse. I mean, we're getting through this. So I'm going to wrap it up here probably, Laura. And I, again, want to encourage everybody to do exactly what she's saying. Go to bleedingheartland.com. and subscribe, get the newsletter. There are things there that you can see and get for free. And then, of course, they're, needing your support, particularly for these freedom of information requests, these records releases that they want. This costs money. The work that Laura does isn't free. And I guess maybe we could wrap up that way, Laura. I mean, I've taken a spin through the blog to try to highlight some of these stories that interest me. But what's top of mind with you right now? And in particular, what are you still trying to get out that you're being stonewalled on that you're hopeful will maybe see the light of day here shortly?
Oh, I always have a lot of records requests going to different agencies. But there are things I'm working on. Support to public employees in Iowa. And I'm still digging on the State of the Union response, exactly who cleared the building at no charge for the governor's office for an event that wasn't an official event. And I mean, I have a few other irons in the fire, but crafting these, because you can't make them too broad or too specific, or if you make them too broad, they try to charge you a lot of money. And if it's too specific, I get what you're looking for. So that takes up a lot of time when I do these requests.
Well, that's great. Good on you. And again, thanks for coming on the show. I've got her graphic up here. Folks, that's Laura Belin. I mean, she is what I call a muckraking reporter. She's out there doing this hard work. And like I said, she had a setback, broke her ankle, and she's still on the job, still chasing these folks figuratively, if not literally. And we're delighted to have her on Podcast by George. Folks, go to bleedingheartland.com. It's a community blog. I mean, you can participate. You can make your comments and write your articles. And it's just a great place to be. They're providing original reporting and commentary about Iowa politics, campaigns and elections, state government, social and environmental issues. And of course, That's also what Podcast by George is all about. And if you like Podcast by George, if you like hearing from folks like Laura on our live line, please go to podcastbygeorge.com and pick a platform. Sign up. You can be notified on YouTube every time a video goes up. You can get notification from iTunes every time the audio podcasts release, and you'll be notified of each and every upcoming show. You won't miss a one. You'll never miss Laura Belin of Bleeding Heartland. But folks, that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.